Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we're sharing a deeply emotional journey about love, trust, betrayal, and the painful path to healing. This is a story of a woman, Emily, who thought she had everything: a loving husband, a future filled with hope, but everything was shattered in a single moment of violence. As she faces the aftermath of betrayal, she must decide if she can ever trust again, and whether love can truly conquer the wounds left behind. Join us as we dive into this powerful story of resilience, strength, and the lessons learned from life's most difficult challenges. Please subscribe to our channel to start today's story. It was supposed to be a perfect night. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing everything meticulously. Ryan's favorite dinner, lasagna, just the way he liked it, was nestled in the oven, filling the house with its comforting scent. I had carefully set the table, hoping that tonight would be the night I would finally earn his mother's approval. It had been weeks of tension, an unbearable cloud hanging over me since Barbara, his mother, moved in with us. Ryan and I had always talked about having a family, but nothing had prepared me for how overwhelming it all felt. The pregnancy had come as a surprise. I had spent weeks navigating morning sickness, feeling the weight of it all in silence, hiding my discomfort as best I could. My body felt like it was betraying me, the nausea and fatigue turning me into someone I didn't recognize. And all the while, Barbara was there, her eyes ever watchful, her criticism as sharp as ever. The day I found out I was pregnant should have been filled with joy. But instead, it was filled with uncertainty and fear. I wanted to tell Ryan first. Just the two of us. To share that small, intimate moment before the world, or Barbara, could intrude. I wanted to tell him in our own way, away from the prying eyes that had become so suffocating. But as the days went on, the more I realized I wasn't sure how much I could trust him anymore, not when Barbara's shadow loomed so large over everything. So, that evening, I had decided I would share the news with him over dinner. I made his favorite lasagna, opened a bottle of wine, which I wouldn't be drinking, and even bought a tiny onesie for our baby. I imagined the moment we'd both share, the joy of this new chapter in our lives. But it didn't happen that way. No, that night, everything fell apart. Barbara, as she often did, inserted herself into our plans. She announced, almost uninvited, that she'd be joining us for dinner. I wanted to protest, but I knew it would only cause more strain. Ryan, ever the dutiful son, agreed. My stomach churned with a mix of morning sickness and the anticipation of what might come. Barbara's presence in our home always set me on edge. And tonight, of all nights, I wasn't sure I could handle it. I stood in the kitchen, nervously stirring the lasagna. It was then that I overheard Barbara on the phone. Her voice was low but unmistakably filled with judgment. "She's hiding something. I know it. I've seen the way she sneaks away to the bathroom at strange hours. She's probably having an affair," she whispered. I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the bile rise in my throat, my hands trembling as I placed the lasagna into the oven. An affair? How could she think that? And why would she say it to Ryan? My heart hammered in my chest as a deep sense of dread crept over me. Dinner was a blur. The room felt stifling, the air heavy with tension. I barely noticed the food in front of me, my mind swirling with fear and anger. And then it happened. I saw Barbara lean in close to Ryan, her hand lightly resting on his shoulder. And I saw his expression shift in an instant. His calm demeanor morphed into something unrecognizable: anger, disbelief, fury. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. Barbara's whisper in his ear was too quiet for me to hear. But I didn't need to hear the words to understand what was happening. The warmth in Ryan's eyes disappeared as his gaze turned cold. I felt my heart sink into my stomach. And before I could even register what was happening, he turned to me. His voice was filled with accusation. "Is this true?" he demanded. I froze, my body tensing. The hurt in his eyes was unbearable, and I couldn't even speak at first. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. And I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. My heart raced, and everything seemed to spin. Before I could even answer, his hand shot out and slapped me. The force of it sent me stumbling back into the wall, my cheek burning with the sting of the slap. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know where to turn. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Tears welled up in my eyes. But before I could even wipe them away, the nausea hit. I vomited right in front of them. Ryan took a step back, his expression still full of shock. But then he froze. His gaze fell on my purse that had fallen open on the floor. The positive pregnancy test slipping out and resting in full view. His face drained of color. His breath hitching in disbelief. "Grace, are you?" He trailed off. His words barely a whisper. I could barely look at him. The man who had once promised to love and protect me had just struck me. The man who I thought I knew had just hurt me in the worst way possible. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm pregnant. I was going to tell you tonight. That's why I made your favorite dinner." The silence that followed was suffocating. There was no apology, no understanding, only a void between us. Barbara stood frozen, her lips pressed into a thin line, trying to hide the shock in her eyes. It was almost as if this was what she had expected all along. Ryan seemed to struggle with what had just happened. The weight of his actions hit him hard. But even in that moment of realization, I wasn't sure if I could forgive him. Could I ever trust him again? Could I even stay with someone who had hurt me and our unborn child? The door creaked open suddenly, and I looked up to see Sarah, a neighbor and close friend, standing in the doorway. Concern was written all over her face. "I heard shouting," she said softly, looking between us. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, the red mark on my cheek, Ryan's guilty expression, and Barbara's tense posture. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. I knew, deep down, that nothing was okay, and nothing would be for a long time. The person I thought I knew, the man I had shared dreams of a future with, had just shattered everything in a single moment. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at Sarah's house, unable to return home, unable to face Ryan or the life I had built with him. My world felt shattered, every corner of it twisted by the brutal reality of what had just happened. I spent the hours curled up in bed, wrestling with the pain in my chest. The tears came in waves. Sometimes they were gentle, and other times they felt like they would drown me. I had never been in such a dark place before, and the questions that raced through my mind seemed endless. Could I ever forgive Ryan? Could I even trust him again after what he had done? Sarah was my rock, and her unwavering support was all that kept me grounded. She made tea, held my hair when I was sick from the pregnancy, and allowed me to break down without judgment. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play. Something far beyond just Ryan's actions. It wasn't just him. It was her, Barbara. The woman who had wormed her way into our home, our lives, and our marriage. She had always been there, casting a shadow over everything Ryan and I tried to build. I had tried to be understanding when she first moved in. Ryan had told me it was temporary, that Barbara needed help after her divorce. He was being a good son, and I wanted to be supportive. But the moment she stepped into our home, things began to change. Her presence was suffocating. Nothing I did was ever good enough. The house wasn't clean enough. My cooking wasn't to her standards. And the most painful thing was the way she would always undermine me in front of Ryan. It was like I was invisible in my own home, and she was always there, making little comments, planting seeds of doubt in Ryan's mind. At first, it was subtle. Ryan's words became more critical, his tone harsher. "You're folding the shirts wrong," he'd say. "You didn't cook enough protein for dinner." Or, "Why are you spending so much time on the phone with your sister? Shouldn't you be focusing more on me?" The small criticisms started to pile up. The man who once adored me, who saw me as his partner, now saw me as something less. And Barbara's whispers to Ryan became more frequent. I had no idea what she said, but I could see the effect it had on him. The man I loved was slowly slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. When I found out I was pregnant, my heart should have soared. But instead, fear gripped me. I couldn't tell Ryan right away. I was terrified of his reaction. But more than that, I was afraid of Barbara's influence. I kept it a secret for weeks, hoping for a moment when it would just be Ryan and me. A time when I could share the joy of our baby before the weight of her interference came crashing down. But as time passed, I realized that the moment would never come. Barbara had already started her campaign of manipulation. I overheard her talking to one of her friends one afternoon, her voice dripping with accusation. "She's hiding something. I saw her running to the bathroom at strange hours. She's having an affair." I know it. I was stunned, hurt, and heartbroken. I hadn't even been able to share my pregnancy with Ryan, and she was already planting seeds of doubt in his mind. The day of the dinner, I had finally worked up the courage to tell him. I thought that if I made his favorite meal, if I showed him how much I cared, he would understand. I had no idea that it would be the worst night of my life. When Barbara whispered to him, I saw it all unfold in real time. His calm expression shifted to something darker. His eyes hardened, and a chill filled the room. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair over, and demanded an answer from me. "Is this true?" Before I could speak, before I could explain anything, his hand shot out, striking me across the face. The pain was a physical shock, but the emotional devastation was far worse. This wasn't just a slap. It was a rejection, a betrayal. This was the man I had married, the man I had trusted with my heart. And now, he had become a stranger. The anger and confusion in his eyes were enough to make my stomach churn. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was pregnant with his child. And he had just hit me in front of his mother. Barbara stood there, her lips pressed into a thin line, watching the scene unfold with a strange, silent approval. I couldn't understand it. How could she stand there and let this happen? And that's when everything clicked for me. It wasn't just Ryan's actions. It was her influence. Barbara had slowly and systematically worked to create doubt, fear, and division between us. She had done it with subtlety, with little whispers in Ryan's ear, feeding him insecurities and doubts about me, about our future. I could feel the weight of it all now, the manipulation, the emotional control, the toxic grip she had on him. It had taken root in our marriage, and I was suffocating under it. Ryan didn't understand what he had just done. He had let his mother's lies shape his reality, and in doing so, he had lost me. Worse, he had hurt me. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him. How could I trust him again when he had allowed Barbara to tear us apart? I had never felt so alone in my life. As I lay in Sarah's guest room that night, I realized just how much work I had ahead of me. I had to figure out whether I could ever go back to Ryan. I had to figure out whether I could ever trust him to protect me, to protect our baby. And more than anything, I had to decide if this relationship was worth fighting for. The days after that night felt like I was walking through a fog, not knowing which direction to go. My mind was a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. I was hurt, betrayed, and deeply shaken by what had happened. I spent the first few days in silence, trying to process it all, trying to make sense of how the man I thought I knew, the man I had married, could have turned on me so suddenly, so violently. But as the hours passed, I realized I couldn't keep running from it. I had to face it head on. Ryan's calls and messages kept coming, each one an apology, a plea to talk, to explain. I couldn't bring myself to pick up the phone. Not yet. How could I? How could I listen to him, knowing that he had hurt me in the worst possible way? But deep down, a small part of me wanted to understand. I wanted to know what had happened to him, what had driven him to act like that. And most importantly, I wanted to know if he was truly sorry, if he truly understood the depth of what he had done. It was Sarah who made me realize that I couldn't stay locked away forever. She was my lifeline, guiding me when I felt like I was drowning. One evening, after yet another voicemail from Ryan, she turned to me and said softly, "You can't keep avoiding this forever. You have to decide if you want to move forward. But you need to do it on your terms. You have to take control now." Her words stuck with me. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't trapped. I had a choice. I didn't have to let Ryan back into my life if I wasn't ready. But if I wanted to rebuild, if I wanted to give him a chance to prove himself, I had to set the boundaries, clear and firm. It was a week later when I finally agreed to meet him. And only because I needed answers. I met him at a coffee shop. A neutral space where I could control the distance between us. I walked in first, choosing a table near the door, my heart racing in my chest. The smell of freshly brewed coffee that once comforted me now made my stomach turn. Every step I took felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of the world. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "I'm here for you. You've got this." Ryan arrived exactly on time. Just like I knew he would. But the man who walked in wasn't the same one I had known. He looked terrible, disheveled, eyes tired, and worn from guilt. He was dressed in the same blue button-down shirt he had worn the night of the incident. My heart ached seeing him like this. The man who had hit me, who had hurt me so deeply, now appeared broken and lost. But I wasn't sure if that was enough. "Can I sit?" he asked softly, his voice filled with hesitation. I nodded, my hands shaking as I gripped my cup of tea. He sat down across from me. And for a moment, we just looked at each other, neither of us knowing where to begin. He opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I'm so sorry, Grace. I never should have done that. I don't know what came over me. But I swear to you, I regret it more than anything. I can't undo it, but I want to do everything I can to make it right." His voice cracked, and I saw the pain in his eyes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness yet, he was just acknowledging the hurt he had caused. But it was hard to know if I could trust him again. Could I really believe that this man, this person who had raised his hand against me, could change? "I've started therapy," Ryan continued, his eyes not leaving mine. "I've already had my first session. I need to understand why I became that person. Why I let my mother's influence control me. I don't recognize the man I've become. And I don't want to be him anymore. I need help, Grace. And I need you to know I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to fix this." I felt a small flicker of hope. But it wasn't enough. Words were just words. And promises could easily be broken. I needed action. I needed to see that he was truly committed to change. Not just for me, but for our child. "I have conditions," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "First, Barbara never sets foot in our house again. No holidays, no visits, nothing. She has no place in our family. Second, you continue therapy. You go every week, no exceptions. Third, if you ever raise a hand to me again, I'm gone. No discussions, no second chances. I'll press charges and fight for full custody of our child. Do you understand?" Ryan's eyes were wide, but he didn't hesitate. "I understand," he said immediately. "I'll do whatever it takes. Grace, I don't want to lose you. I love you, and I love our baby. I hate myself for what I've done. And I swear, I'll prove it to you every day." His sincerity was palpable. It wasn't just words this time. I could see the desperation in his eyes. The fear of losing everything he had. But I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust, repairing the damage, it would take time. And I wasn't sure if I could ever fully heal from the trauma of what had happened. But for the first time since that awful night, I felt a spark of hope. We weren't there yet, not by a long shot. But we had a path forward, a difficult one, but one I was willing to try. For our baby, for the family I still dreamed of. "I'll give you a chance," I said quietly, my voice filled with uncertainty. "But it's going to take time. And you have to prove it. Ryan, you have to show me that you're serious. I can't do this alone." He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I will, Grace. I swear, I will." As I left the coffee shop that day, I didn't have all the answers. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were taking the first step towards healing. And that was something. As the weeks passed, Ryan and I worked through the difficult process of rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of the past felt too heavy to bear. But with each counseling session, with every small step forward, we began to find our way back to each other. Ryan was committed to his therapy, and I saw a man trying to become the person I once knew. someone who could be trusted again. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt. But I could feel the change. However small it seemed, our daughter, Lily, became the light in our lives. A reminder of the love we wanted to build, a love free from fear, control, and manipulation. As I held her in my arms for the first time, I promised myself that I would protect her from the toxic patterns that had once plagued my marriage. She would grow up in a home where love was unconditional and safe. Though Barbara tried to interfere, we stood firm, setting boundaries to protect our new family. Ryan and I worked together, choosing each other over the toxic influence of the past. And while it wasn't easy, the trust between us slowly started to heal, piece by piece. It wasn't the perfect family I had imagined when we first met, but it was ours. And as we moved forward, I learned that healing takes time. That love doesn't always come without pain, but that it's possible to rebuild something broken if both people are willing to put in the work. For Lily, for us, I was ready to keep fighting. Thank you for following our story. Please subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more life stories.